There is a transgender threat, but the threat is not from people who identify as transgender. The threat is to people who identify as transgender and to our society as a whole. The threat is coming from activists pushing a transgender ideology who reinvent language, tear down medical safeguards, and push their ideology on children. First, let's understand some of the basics in their own words. According to a recent publication by the American Psychological Association, quote, transgender is an umbrella term for persons whose gender identity, gender expression, or behavior does not conform to that typically associated with the sex to which they were assigned at birth. Note that phrase, assigned at birth. According to trans activists, biological sex is not real. The sex which a person identifies with is that person's sex, regardless of his or her innate physical characteristics. In other words, a man who identifies as a woman is a woman and always was a woman. What does biology say? Modern science shows that our sex manifests itself in every level of our being, from the obvious physical differences between men and women to our internal organs and the way our bodies are structured, and continuing all the way down to our DNA. Men and women are different from the moment of conception. Cosmetic surgery and cross-sex hormones can affect appearances, but they cannot change the underlying biological reality. Some trans activists try to muddy the waters by pointing to certain extremely rare disorders of sexual development. But just because a person has a developmental disorder that makes it harder to be readily categorized as either male or female does not mean that person is neither male nor female. What does philosophy say? We don't have to read Genesis to understand that God created us male and female. We know that there is a difference between identity and reality. Just because someone identifies as something doesn't necessarily mean he or she is that thing. I identify as a Baltimore Orioles fan, therefore I am one. But if I identified myself as an 80-year-old woman, simply claiming that would not make me an 80-year-old woman. What about the medical and psychological fields? Gender dysphoria is a real condition that can cause tremendous pain and suffering. Certainly, we should be compassionate towards people with gender dysphoria. But so-called sex reassignment is impossible because sex isn't assigned to begin with. And there is no medical evidence that transitioning from one sex to another actually resolves that pain and suffering. In fact, there is a lot of evidence that transgender treatments actually cause further harm. In 2016, the Obama administration concluded that after a review of the best studies, that there were no clinically significant improvements in the quality of life of people who underwent gender reassignment surgery. The most thorough long-term study of people who underwent gender reassignment surgery was done in Sweden over the course of 30 years. It found that people who underwent gender reassignment surgery had a suicide rate 20 times higher than their peers. And a study just last year, using the largest data set ever, revealed that neither hormonal nor surgical transition brought any benefit to patients. Finally, the best studies indicate that when children with gender dysphoria are given time and space to deal with their internal conflicts without puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones, between 80 and 95% of them will naturally embrace their bodily sex. So how does all of this affect you? What is the threat to society? First, trans activists push their ideology at the expense of girls and women. They demand laws that allow men who identify as women to enter female-only spaces, like women's bathrooms, locker rooms, and even prisons. This poses a safety and privacy risk to our mothers, sisters, wives, daughters, and granddaughters. Males are also being allowed in many states to compete in female sports. Males have inherent differences in their bodily structures, which no surgery or hormone can change, which give them tremendous athletic advantages. Second, people are being forced to speak and act in support of trans ideology. There are increasing examples of people being fired from their jobs for not addressing a person by that person's preferred pronouns, or shamed for not specifying their own pronouns. Most importantly, transgender ideology is being marketed to young children. In examples like the Genderbread Person or Drag Queen Story Hours, these messages confuse children, and the intense push for transgender ideology over the last several years has led to a rapid increase of teenage girls identifying as transgender. For children to be healthy, they need help from adults to accept their physical bodies and understand themselves as male or female. People who identify as transgender deserve our love and compassion. And that is exactly why we must speak the truth in love. Biology is not bigotry. I'm Ryan Anderson, author and president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center for Edify.